After a viral altercation video, arrests across 3 different states, grooming allegations, and a felony burglary charge, there is an uncomfortable conversation surrounding Ezra Miller that many studio executives and Hollywood elites are trying to avoid. For a time, Miller was exactly what Hollywood wanted to celebrate. A progressive actor crossing from indie film into major franchises, carried by performances that were irresistible to audiences. But off the screen, their life was the exact opposite. Miller wasn't doing too well. People around them were reporting abuse, manipulation, threats, and Miller themselves seemed to believe they had some kind of divine purpose, one worth dragging others into danger for. Miller's story is not just about a talented indie darling rising to the top. It's also about what happens when someone becomes so financially valuable to massive corporations that the world starts making excuses for behavior that would destroy almost anyone else. If Ezra Miller didn't become a Hollywood anchor, you could easily interpret the early trajectory as a warning sign. To overcome a severe childhood speech impediment, Miller was put into classical vocal training at age 6. By age 8, Miller was performing in the U.S. premiere of composer Philip Glass's contemporary opera at Lincoln Center, eventually securing regular roles with the Metropolitan Opera. Needless to say, Miller had quite the talent. At just 14 years old, Miller was cast in the independent film After School. In that movie, Miller played a detached boarding school student named Robert, who accidentally films the substance-induced deaths of 2 classmates. Following that project, Miller decided to drop out of high school completely to pursue acting full-time. According to Miller's own public statements, the life-altering choice came after a vivid dream. Miller claimed to meet the composer Ludwig van Beethoven in a subway station and said the composer urged them to quit school to dedicate their life entirely to artistic expression. That disturbing energy translated effortlessly to the screen. In 2011, Miller starred in We Need to Talk About Kevin, a psychological thriller where they played a sociopathic teenager who commits a high school massacre. The film premiered at the Cannes Film Festival to massive critical acclaim, and Miller's chilling performance earned a Best Supporting Actor nomination at the British Independent Film Awards. The industry praise cemented Miller's reputation for playing highly intelligent, detached, and emotionally disturbed youth. That momentum quickly landed them the breakout role of Patrick in The Perks of Being a Wallflower. But during the filming of Wallflower in Pittsburgh, the public saw the first real crack in the facade. Miller was a passenger in a car pulled over for a broken brake light, and when officers approached, they found 20 grams of marijuana on them. Rather than apologizing, Miller told reporters there was nothing to hide, calling it a harmless herb that heightens the senses. The possession charge was eventually dropped by a Pennsylvania judge. Miller instead pleaded guilty to 2 summary citations for disorderly conduct and paid a $600 penalty. At the time, fans felt comfortable with the behavior. It didn't look like a troubled actor spinning out of control. It just seemed like an eccentric indie artist refusing to conform to mainstream Hollywood expectations. Miller spent the next few years touring with a self-described genre-queer indie band called Sons of an Illustrious Father. And that unique image seemed to pay off. In 2016, Warner Bros. Placed Miller at the center of 2 of its most valuable active franchises. They were cast in Fantastic Beasts, a role that became the main focal point for multiple blockbuster sequels. Simultaneously, Miller entered the DC Extended Universe as Barry Allen, The Flash, debuting in Dawn of Justice and Suicide Squad before landing a starring role in Justice League. Miller was quite literally a double franchise anchor, holding up hundreds of millions of dollars in studio assets. During the 2016 protests at Standing Rock, the 23-year-old Miller met a 12-year-old Native American activist named Toccata Iron Eyes. According to legal documents later filed by Toccata's parents, Miller became quite fixated on her, flying her to London at 13 to visit the set of Fantastic Beasts, attempting to pay her tuition through a private spiritual organization called Quiet, and introduced her to drugs and alcohol. Everything truly started unraveling in 2020. Due to the global pandemic lockdowns, production on The Secrets of Dumbledore was halted in the United Kingdom, leaving Miller stranded for an extended period in Iceland. On April 6, 2020, a video surfaced on Twitter that, to say the least, shocked the internet. It showed Miller grabbing a woman by the neck and slamming her to the ground outside a local bar. A bartender intervened, claiming Miller then grabbed him by the throat and spit in his face multiple times before staff escorted Miller off the premises. Following the altercation, Miller rented a local Airbnb and spent 2 months in Iceland running a makeshift commune. Eyewitnesses reported that Miller walked the streets barefoot, exhibited frequent emotional outbursts, and hosted long monologues centered around their own spiritual and messianic delusions. Toccata Iron Eyes also reportedly traveled to Iceland during this time to join the circle. Despite the viral spread of the video and police involvement, local authorities did not file any criminal charges. And if you're wondering if they got fired at least, then you'd be wrong. Warner Bros. Allowed them to resume filming both Fantastic Beasts and The Flash in the UK, choosing to ignore the unresolved Iceland incident. Once an actor reaches that level of financial importance, corporations look at them as an institution rather than a person. The studio didn't just want Miller to be fine, they needed them to be. Now, I'm not saying people don't deserve second chances, but there were clearly signs that this was just the first of many incidents, and that proved to be the case on the set of The Flash in 2021. Crew members described Miller having repeated meltdowns on set, freezing mid-take, and seemingly losing track of where they were. At some point, Iron Eyes officially dropped out of Bard College at Simon's Rock to join Miller's traveling group. Her parents alleged Miller was restricting her phone access, controlling her social media accounts, and leaving physical bruises on her body. Musician Oliver Ignatius claimed to have witnessed Miller verbally abusing and screaming at her for wearing makeup. Additionally, Miller's former fiancé detailed years of severe emotional abuse, explaining that Miller systematically gaslit her and convinced their entire social circle that she was the abusive partner whenever she challenged Miller's behavior. In 2022, Miller went on quite the frenzy across multiple states and countries. In January, Miller posted a viral video on Instagram targeting a North Carolina branch of the Ku Klux Klan, demanding the group's self-destruction.
Look, if y'all want to die, I suggest just yourselves with your own. Otherwise, keep doing exactly what you're doing right now, and you know what I'm talking about. And then, we'll do it for you if that's really what you want.
By February, Miller traveled to Berlin, visiting the apartment of a former acquaintance named Nadia. When Nadia requested that Miller not smoke inside the home, Miller called her a Nazi, spread tobacco all over her floor, and refused to leave for over 30 minutes. By March, Miller moved to Hawaii, where he became the subject of 10 separate emergency police calls in a matter of weeks for loitering, filming people at gas stations, and harassment. On March 28th, Miller became enraged at patrons in a local karaoke bar who were singing Lady Gaga's song, Shallow. Miller yelled things that I definitely can't say on this platform, lunged at a man playing darts, and grabbed a microphone from a woman. Miller claimed they were targeted by a white supremacist and recorded the arrest in an attempt to turn it into NFT crypto art while accusing the officers of discrimination for misgendering them. Hours after being bailed out by a local host couple, Miller barged into the couple's private bedroom, stole the wife's passport and the husband's wallet, and threatened them with violence. Weeks later, on April 19th, Miller threw a chair at a private gathering in Pahoa, striking a 26-year-old woman directly on the forehead and leaving a half-inch laceration. By the summer of 2022, Miller was traveling across the United States wearing body armor and carrying protection because they thought they were being tracked by the FBI and the Klan. At their 96-acre farm in Vermont, investigative journalists revealed Miller was housing a 25-year-old mother and her 3 young children in chaotic conditions. The family was surrounded by large-scale, unlicensed farming operations and unsecured tactical equipment left scattered near children's toys. Sources even alleged a toddler handled loose ammunition. But the mother and her children weren't the only ones staying at the property. Iron Eyes reappeared yet again, with investigative reports later revealing she was also living inside the farmhouse. Behind closed doors, sources claimed Miller was experiencing profound delusions of grandeur, reportedly claiming a divine messiah-like status. Miller allegedly believed their union with Iron Eyes would spark a global movement and an end-time scenario. Despite grooming allegations, physical assaults, and a felony burglary charge, Warner Bros. Discovery proceeded with the release of The Flash in 2023. The studio shielded and accommodated Miller, prioritizing asset preservation over ethical considerations. Miller made a single public appearance at the film's Los Angeles premiere, keeping a low profile and thanking studio executives for their grace. But as you can imagine, and probably already know, the public backlash was too severe. The Flash was a historic box office disaster, marking the end of Miller's mainstream franchise era. On January 13, 2023, Miller entered a formal resolution in a Vermont Superior Court. Miller admitted to a lesser misdemeanor infraction of unlawful trespass, and in exchange, the state dismissed the more severe felony charges entirely. Miller received a suspended sentence, a $500 fine, and 1 year of administrative monitoring. Because Miller successfully adhered to the court's 41 terms, including health treatment, compliance, and sobriety, the monitoring concluded and the felony case was permanently closed. The tribal court case regarding Toccata was dropped when her family chose to step back, and a separate temporary restriction order out of Massachusetts was formally thrown out by a judge. After 3 years of silence, Miller made a surprise public appearance on the red carpet at the 2025 Cannes Film Festival, attempting a comeback in international independent cinema. In an interview given to an Italian outlet, Miller addressed their past with a classic charitable framing, stating that while they held deep remorse for their past choices, they were ultimately grateful for the personal lessons that came out of those dark times. Miller is now co-writing and starring in an upcoming vampire film with Lynn Ramsey, the same director behind We Need to Talk About Kevin. The film is still in development with no release date set. Whether Hollywood is actually ready to take Miller back remains to be seen.